A nurse with 19 stab wounds woke up to find hundreds of Hells Angels motorcycles surrounding her home. Not for revenge, but for something no one expected. What happens when society's most feared outlaw bikers decide you're under their protection forever? The morning sun struggled through thick fog as Sarah Chen stood at her kitchen window. Steam rose from her coffee mug, warming her tired face as she watched kids wait for the school bus across the street. Her small house felt extra quiet this morning. She winced as she shifted her weight, the fresh white bandages under her shirt pulling tight across her skin. Just yesterday, everything had been normal. She had walked home from her job at the hospital, taking the same route she always did. The air had smelled like rain and car exhaust. Then she heard it, a crash so loud it made her ears ring, followed by the sound of metal scraping on road. "Help!" a weak voice had called out. Sarah had run toward the sound without thinking. Her nurse training kicked in like a switch being flipped. Around the corner, she saw it all. A man lay on the ground next to a turned-over motorcycle, his leg bent at a wrong angle. Blood pooled beneath him, dark red against the gray road. Another man stood over him, knife in hand, going through the hurt man's leather jacket. "Leave him alone," Sarah had shouted, her voice stronger than she felt. "He needs help." The man with the knife had turned to her, his eyes cold and empty like a shark's. "Walk away, lady," he had snarled. "This isn't your business." But Sarah couldn't walk away, not with someone bleeding out on the street. "I'm a nurse," she had said, moving closer. "Let me help him." What happened next played in slow motion in her mind as she stared out her window, the knife coming toward her, the sharp pain as it entered her side, the look of surprise on the attacker's face when she didn't run, but instead kept moving toward the hurt biker. Again and again the knife had come down, but somehow she had managed to reach the injured man, her own blood mixing with his on the pavement as she used her scarf as a tourniquet on his leg. 19 stab wounds, the doctor had told her later, after both she and the biker had been rushed to the same hospital where she worked. Her co-workers had saved both their lives. Now, standing in her kitchen one day later, Sarah touched the small tattoo on her wrist, a medical symbol she had gotten when she graduated nursing school. It reminded her why she became a nurse, to save lives, no matter who needed saving. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another text from her boss. "Take all the time you need to heal. We're all so proud of you, Sarah." But mixed in with all the nice messages were ones that worried her. "You should move," one coworker had written. "Do you know who that biker was?" Sarah hadn't known. She still didn't really know. But the local news had said he was part of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. They had called her brave on TV, but their voices suggested they thought she was foolish too. Sarah pulled her curtains closed, suddenly feeling very exposed in her little house on this quiet street. She didn't regret helping the man. But now she wondered what might come next. Sarah sat on her worn couch, trying to focus on the TV show playing in front of her. But her mind kept going back to yesterday. The knife, the blood, the fear in the biker's eyes as he lay on the road. She had worked in the emergency room for 6 years and had seen all kinds of wounds, but it felt very different when the blood was her own. Her side throbbed with each breath, a constant reminder of how close she had come to death. The phone rang again. It was the police this time. "Ms. Chen, we need to ask you more questions about the attack," the officer said. His voice sounded tired and a bit nervous. "The man you helped isn't just any biker. He's high up in the Hells Angels. The person who hurt both of you is still out there, and we're worried." Sarah looked out her window at the empty street. The fog had lifted, but dark clouds now hung low in the sky. Rain would come soon. "I already told you everything I know," she said. "I didn't see the face of the man with the knife clearly." "That's not why I'm calling," the officer said after a pause. "We think you might be in danger. The Hells Angels. They have their own way of handling things. Sometimes they don't wait for the law." After she hung up, Sarah's hands shook so badly she dropped her mug. It shattered on the floor, hot tea splashing her feet. As she bent to pick up the pieces, pain shot through her bandaged torso. Tears welled in her eyes, not from the physical pain, but from a sudden wave of fear and doubt. What had she gotten herself into? On her fridge hung a photo of her parents, both gone now. They had moved to America when Sarah was just 5, working long hours at their small restaurant so she could go to school and become a nurse. "Always help others," her mother used to say. "But be smart about it, too." Had she been smart yesterday? Or just foolishly brave? The hospital had given her 2 weeks off to heal. 2 weeks alone in this house with her thoughts and fears. Her neighbor, Mrs. Lopez, had brought over a casserole and a worried smile. "Such a brave thing you did," she had said, but her eyes darted around nervously, as if danger might be lurking nearby. Even her friends seemed to be keeping their distance, sending texts instead of visiting. Sarah picked up the local newspaper from her coffee table. Her story was on the front page. Local nurse stabbed 19 times while saving biker. The article mentioned the Hells Angels 3 times. It made her sound either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. Rain began to tap against her windows as the sky darkened further. Sarah pulled a blanket around her shoulders, feeling suddenly cold. Her house had always felt safe before. A small but cozy place she had worked hard to buy on her nurse's salary. Now, the creaking of the old walls made her jump. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper. What if the knifeman came back to finish what he started? What if the police were right about the Hells Angels taking matters into their own hands? Would they blame her somehow? As thunder rumbled in the distance, Sarah locked her doors and windows. Then she sat in the growing darkness, listening to the rain and waiting for whatever would come next. The sound came first, a low rumble like far-off thunder. Sarah had been dozing on the couch when she heard it. The pain pills made her sleepy, but this sound cut through the fog in her brain. It grew louder and louder until the windows of her small house began to shake. Her teacup rattled on the coffee table. Sarah pushed herself up, wincing as her stitches pulled tight. The clock read 10:17 a.m. She had been home from the hospital for just over 24 hours. The rumble was so loud now that she could feel it in her chest, making her wounds throb in time with it. With shaky legs, she made her way to the front window and peeked through the curtains. What she saw made her heart stop, then race. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. They poured into her quiet street from both ends like a river of gleaming metal and leather. Big bikes with roaring engines, ridden by men and women in black leather jackets. On the backs of those jackets, she could see the same patch she had glimpsed on the injured biker she had helped, the Hells Angels symbol. Across the street, Mrs. Lopez came out onto her porch, then quickly went back inside, pulling her young son with her. Other neighbors appeared in windows or doorways, some holding up phones to record what was happening. A few shouted to each other over the noise. "Call the police!" someone yelled. But no one moved to help as the motorcycles formed a tight ring around Sarah's house, 3 deep in some places. The engines cut off one by one until a heavy silence fell over the street, broken only by the clicking of hot metal cooling in the morning air. A large man with a gray beard and arms covered in tattoos got off his bike directly in front of Sarah's house. He took off his helmet and handed it to the rider next to him. The patch on his jacket was larger than the others, with extra marks that Sarah didn't understand. He must be someone important, she thought, her mouth dry with fear. He looked up at her window, somehow knowing exactly where she stood behind the curtain, and nodded once. Then he walked up her short path and stopped at her door. He didn't knock right away. He just stood there, like he was giving her time to decide what to do. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. 3 text messages and 2 missed calls, all from the last minute. One from her boss. "Are you okay? It's all over social media. Hundreds of bikers at your house?" Time seemed to slow down as Sarah looked from her phone to her door. The man outside waited patiently. She could call the police. She could hide. She could pretend she wasn't home. But something told her none of those things would work. Whatever was happening, she had to face it. With trembling fingers, she unlocked her door and opened it just as the man raised his hand to knock. Up close, he was even bigger, at least 6.5 feet tall and built like a wall. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, lined with deep creases around eyes that had seen a lot. Those eyes looked at her now, taking in her pale face, the way she held her side where the bandages were. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a large man. "My name is Tank. You saved our brother's life yesterday." He removed his gloves slowly. "We need to talk." "The man who hurt you is being dealt with," Tank said as he sat at Sarah's kitchen table. His large hands looked out of place, holding her small teacup. "We have our own way of handling those who hurt our family, or those who help us." Sarah sat across from him, her heart still racing, but no longer from fear. Outside, hundreds of bikers remained, standing by their motorcycles, forming a wall of leather and steel around her house. Through the window, she could see police cars at the end of the street, but they stayed back, just watching. "I was just doing my job," Sarah said softly. "I'm a nurse. I help people." Tank nodded and reached into his jacket. Sarah tensed, but he only pulled out a thick envelope. "The angels pay their debts," he said, placing it on the table between them. "This should cover your medical bills, and then some." When Sarah began to shake her head, he raised his hand. "It's not just money," he continued. "From today, every Hell's Angel in the country knows this address, knows your name, knows your face." He tapped the table with one thick finger. "Nobody, and I mean nobody, will ever harm you again." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at her hospital locker, putting on her scrubs for the first time since the attack. Her wounds had healed enough for her to return to work, though her body still ached when she moved too quickly. The envelope from Tank remained untouched in her dresser drawer at home. She hadn't spent a penny of it. Instead, she had written a letter to the hospital's children's wing, making an anonymous donation in the exact amount. As Sarah walked through the hospital halls, she noticed people watching her, whispering. Her story had been on the local news for days. "Nurse protected by biker gang," made for good headlines. Some of her co-workers kept their distance, as if her connection to the Hells Angels might be catching. Others treated her like a hero. "The man who attacked you and Ricky was found," Dr. Patterson told her during lunch break. "At the bottom of the river. Police are calling it gang-related." He didn't look at her directly when he said it. Sarah just nodded, not knowing what to feel. Relief? Horror? Guilt? All three mixed together in her stomach until she couldn't eat another bite. That evening, as she walked home, a lone motorcycle passed her slowly. The rider nodded respectfully before speeding away. It happened again the next day. And the next. Different bikes, different riders, but always that same nod of respect. The neighbors noticed, too. Crime in the area dropped. No one got robbed. No cars were broken into. Even the local teens stopped spraying graffiti on the corner store. 6 months after that foggy morning, Sarah hung a small framed note on her kitchen wall. It had arrived with no return address, no signature. Courage isn't measured by strength, but by what you're willing to lose. Next to it, she hung her first nursing certificate, remembering why she had chosen this path. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Sarah would touch the scars on her side, feeling their raised edges under her fingertips. 19 marks that had changed her life forever. She had been trained to save lives, but she never expected saving one would connect her to a world so different from her own. She never expected that her simple act of bravery would earn her both friends and enemies she never knew she had. When fog settled over the street now, Sarah would sit by her window with a cup of tea, listening. Sometimes she imagined she could hear the distant rumble of motorcycles, not as a threat, but as a reminder that life could change in a single moment. That courage came in many forms, and that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Her mother had always said to help others, and Sarah had. What she hadn't expected was how much that help would come back to her, in ways both wonderful and complicated.